Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Maritime affairs, a whole new sector of warfare that a lot of us in India didn't think it would be as frontline as we can see it today. The Indian Ocean is pretty much in every discussion when we talk about security in this entire region. With the Chinese taking a step forward in belligerence, we need to understand what the next game of war will be at seas. To understand all this, I have someone really special. I have Commodore Anil Singh, retired submariner from the Indian Navy. He's the Vice President of the Indian Maritime Foundation, and an analyst and a speaker, as well as a writer on various different maritime affairs. Sir, thank you so much for taking this time out from your very busy schedule. I read a lot of your articles as well, and I see you part of a lot of organizations trying to discuss maritime security as well. Thank you and welcome to Dev Talks.
Well, thank you, Aadi. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and I hope I'm able to give you some useful inputs on the maritime dimension. Yes, you were right when you said it's a subject which has not really been explored too much. And, very often we in the Navy blame the sea blindness on Delhi's distance 900 miles from the sea. Anyway, yeah.
Delhi has to sit on the shores very soon, sir, because the way things are going across, especially in the Indian Ocean, and the way events are unfolding today, the next war seems to be in the sea itself. So then again, I'll come back to what I was saying. The next war, as I said, everybody looks at it as a naval war, looking at the Chinese belligerence in the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait and stuff like that. I'd like you to give us a brief outlook. What is your outlook over the whole situation, especially in the Indo-Pacific region?
Look, the Indo-Pacific has now become the global sort of geopolitical center of gravity and the geo-economic center of gravity, because attributable mainly to the rise of China, to a lesser extent India, the US intention to continue dominating these waters, other prosperous economies like Japan, South Korea, and the Southeast Asian states, and the general instability that prevails in the region has all sort of combined to make the Indo-Pacific the sort of hub, the epicenter of global geopolitics. And this is where the great game is going to be played out in the 21st century. It's going to be hotly contested. This contestation could very well lead to a confrontation. Conflict cannot be ruled out, but hopefully good sense will prevail over the years and we won't reach that stage, because that is detrimental to everybody. Why is the Indo-Pacific so important? Firstly, besides the geopolitical aspect which I explained, 60% of the global population resides in this region. 65% of the global GDP is generated here. 70% of all global trade passes through this region. And therefore, it is not only important and critical for the countries which constitute the Indo-Pacific, but it is also critical for the rest of the world because of all these economic parameters of 70% of their trade passing through these waters. So making sure that it remains safe and secure is very important for them. And that is why in the last couple of years, we've seen not only are the Indo-Pacific countries concerned about this region, but even very Eurocentric countries like Germany and the Netherlands, or for that matter, even the European Union, have articulated their own Indo-Pacific strategies, mainly from an economic perspective, mainly for the security and safety of their trade. They too are now very keen to ensure that this rules-based order that we talk about and a free and open Indo-Pacific does not get jeopardized by anybody else. That is fundamentally why this region has become so important. What is going to happen here, we will discuss subsequently. How things are going to pan out, how things might pan out. But this is the fundamental reason why the Indo-Pacific has suddenly become so important to the world.
Interesting, sir. I think you brought out very nicely that the world's trade is dependent on this. And that's something that we see when we study the sea lines of communication from this entire region. And of course, it's a very vast area that pretty much everybody seems to be interested in. Sir, but the biggest threat in the region is China, and with the size of the Chinese Navy, and I'm sure they are, but they claim to be the largest Navy in the world today in terms of the number of ships. What kind of a threat do you think that the naval, just at an outlook, what kind of a threat do you think the Chinese Navy provides for in the Indian Ocean region? And are they even ready to actually carry forward the threat, looking at the factor that they're a very, very brand new Navy?
Yeah, well, China is a chapter by itself. It's a story by itself. in the Indo-Pacific. As I said, the importance of Indo-Pacific has primarily been driven by the rise of China in the last 2 decades, when China has come out of its shell, and ever since Xi Jinping has taken over as the General Secretary of the party and the President of China, he has very clearly articulated China's vision. And that was also encapsulated in the 2015 Defense White Paper, which very clearly said by 2035, the Chinese will be the most advanced military in the world. And by 2049, if you paraphrase what he said, they would like to be the global numero uno and displace the US from that pedestal. That is very clearly China's long-term strategy, and they make no bones about it. They make no secrets about it. The worrying thing for everybody else is that as of 2020, notwithstanding the effects of the pandemic, China is on track. They have various milestones they've marked to reach this goal by 2049. As of 2020, they're very much on track to achieve that. Now, what is the threat? China believes that it has a God-given right to rule the world, the Middle Kingdom syndrome, that we are the Middle Kingdom and everybody else is around us. And they are trying to get over that's why they call it the great rejuvenation of the Chinese people. 2049 will mark the great rejuvenation of the Chinese people, of the Chinese dream, which means that they want to be the global superpower again, as they were in the Middle Ages, as the Middle Kingdom. The only way they can do that is by displacing the US from its pedestal at the moment. And as history has proven, it is maritime power that has determined global supremacy.
True.
Rise and fall of nations has been totally dependent on their maritime capability. Whether you take the Peloponnesian Wars in the BC era between Athens and Sparta, more recently, you're well aware that the sun never set on the British Empire because Britannia ruled the waves, which basically meant that they were dominating the world's oceans. As soon as that receded after World War II, because they couldn't sustain that kind of thing, USA took over, and for the last 8 decades, USA has been the status quo superpower in the world. There was a blip for 40 years. Yes, the Soviet Union tried to compete with it, but fell by the wayside ultimately. And ever since that, in the last 20 years, China has thrown down the gauntlet to the US. It is starting by first trying to diminish US influence in the Western Pacific, the South China Sea, particularly the Taiwan Straits, East China Sea. And in its attempt to sort of dominate for maritime dominance, the next step is going to move westwards into the Indian Ocean, because Indian Ocean is going to be its gateway to the Atlantic. So it has to ultimately, its intention is ultimately to dominate the Indian Ocean. Now, why has it not done anything so far? Because the PLA Navy at the moment does not have the capability or the capacity to take on the Indian Navy, Indian Ocean. You would realize that despite that whole standoff which happened last year along the LAC, which resulted in the unfortunate incident in Galwan, and China refusing to revert to the status quo, they did nothing provocative in the maritime domain. They maintained a very low profile in the maritime domain. We never heard of their warships coming with any aggressive intent. They were there, they were a presence, they were operating wherever they need to operate, but they did nothing in the maritime domain to provoke India. India, in fact, had stepped up its vigil and was keeping a very close watch on the movements of the PLA Navy in the Eastern Indian Ocean.
True.
And were monitoring their presence and their intentions. But this is not going to be the case maybe 10 years from now. China has embarked on a very ambitious shipbuilding program. It already is the largest navy in the world by numbers. In 1949, China did not have a navy. They celebrated 70 years of the navy in 2019. And today, they are the largest navy in the world. They have 355 or so ships and submarines in commission at the moment. To give you an example, the Indian Navy has 140. They are building 18 to 20 warships, major warships, with blue water capability every year, year on year. In 2020 itself, they have commissioned 3 Type 055 destroyers, which are the largest and the most powerful ships of the kind in the world, 3 in 1 year. They have commissioned a nuclear ballistic missile submarine. They have commissioned 7 other destroyers and frigates. So 18 big ships. Till September, they'd already commissioned, and a couple of more on the anvil. So they are very clearly going to be a huge and powerful navy. What they are focusing now is on building their blue water capability, so that they are able to project power with this navy far and wide, and not just be restricted to the Western Pacific. At the moment, they have an ability to be present in the Indian Ocean, but they are not an Indian Ocean power as yet. That is one part of it, the naval build-up. The second part, as far as India is concerned, is that they have established a base in Djibouti, which is at the western extremity of the Indo-Pacific. They have more or less full control over Gwadar port because that is where the China-Pakistan economic corridor starts from. They are making great overtures to Iran, particularly after the American sanctions on Iran. China moved in very fast to try and take that place by offering a lot of economic largesse, offering to buy Iranian oil, helping to develop Chabahar and the other ports in the Straits of Hormuz. So tomorrow they could have some control in the Straits of Hormuz. They have major investments along the East African coast in Kenya, Tanzania, to an extent where they're almost controlling those countries. In fact, part of its so-called debt trap diplomacy that we keep reading about, they have told Kenya that if Kenya cannot pay for the high-speed railway, they should give Mombasa port to Kenya for 99 years. Just as they've done in Sri Lanka with Hambantota. They've taken Hambantota port for 99 years on lease because Sri Lanka could not repay the interest on the loan, which China had extended to them for as part of that Belt and Road initiative of this, the One Belt, One Road. So China has, in a combination of naval build-up, maritime power, infrastructure development, creating a rather comprehensive approach towards its maritime power. It is not focusing on any one thing. And when I talk of maritime power, we often confuse maritime power with naval power. For example, India is today a naval power, but I'm not sure we can call ourselves a maritime power. China, on the other hand, from a country which is not blessed by a favorable geography. India is very lucky. We are blessed by a very favorable maritime geography. China is not. They've got shallow waters. They've got choke points to tackle. They've got all kinds of issues. But they today are actually a maritime power. They have the largest navy in the world. They have the largest coast guard in the world. They have the largest fishing fleet in the world. They have the largest merchant fleet in the world. They are the world's largest shipbuilders. And 7 of the 10 most busiest ports in the world are Chinese. Now that's maritime power. And they have a Belt and Road initiative where they're developing ports right from the mainland of China right up to Rotterdam. Once those ports are developed, they will have a say over there. They will then have an excuse to position a navy at each of these ports, saying that we needed to secure our own trade and energy, because most of Chinese energy comes from the Straits of Hormuz, from the Gulf, which is their concern. And that is what is known as what they call the Malacca dilemma, which perhaps we'll come to later.
True.
So this is the sort of overall perspective of how China is going about its approach towards becoming a dominant maritime power and subsequently and consequently a global superpower.
Scary propositions, so when you put it like that, they've actually mind-boggling, absolutely. And for a country that did not have anything, and especially when you look at the USA, which literally dominated the world's ocean, especially the Pacific during the Second World War. I mean, they had enough ships to spare for atomic blasts and destroy them and see what happens to those ships and stuff like that, to a point where a new nation like China is trying to compete with that sort of a very strong maritime and naval power put together. Coming to the Indian Navy, so we've also embarked on a shipbuilding sort of a, drive. We've been not, of course, as comparable to what you described as far as the Chinese are concerned. There's a huge impetus on make in India. We've got the second carrier in place. How do you see the capability build up today versus what we need to get to even probably protect our domain in this entire region? And what would you categorize as our focus areas? Because there was a huge debate on some time back with regards extra submarines or the aircraft carrier, and there's always been a balance around here. So what would be your focus area that you would like to highlight?
See, firstly, we must understand that naval force levels are not a zero-sum game. It's not submarine versus submarine or aircraft carrier versus aircraft carrier. It's about capability and the area of operations. So as I mentioned earlier, in the Indian Ocean today, the Indian Navy is the preeminent naval power. And there is no other naval presence in the Indian Ocean which can compete with India's naval power. Whether it will be like that 10 years from now is a question we need to ask. We have a fairly robust shipbuilding program as well. We've got almost 40 ships and submarines under construction at the moment. But obviously, we're not a patch on the Chinese. The Chinese are also not going to position all these ships in the Indian Ocean. They're going to have to protect their own waters. They have far more serious commitments in the Western Pacific. But certainly, there will be a match for the Indian Navy in a decade from now if they continue with their shipbuilding program the way they're going about it, and we continue the way we are going about it. Unfortunately for us, despite having a very wide, capability, complete, almost full spectrum naval capability, there are gaps. And unlike the Chinese system, where perhaps if the CMC decides that we need 10 warships, they'll be built. Here, we are a democracy. We have our ups and downs. We have our debates. The political leadership sometimes we think they don't understand. They must be having their own compulsions. The defense budget we never get the money we want. So all those factors have to be taken into account. So looking at that, we haven't done too badly, but we could do much better. Let me be very frank. And it's not only about the money. It's not only about capability. It's about how we go about it. For example, Indian naval ships today, yes, Indian Navy was at the forefront of indigenization. Much before Atmanirbharta and Make in India became buzzwords, the Indian Navy, right from 1960, has been focusing on becoming what we call a builder Navy and not a buyer Navy. Because if any country has to be a global power or even a military power, it cannot be dependent on imports because anyone can turn off the tap. You have to develop your own capability, and the Navy has been at the forefront in doing so. We have had reversals because of that. Our shipbuilding has not kept pace with what we would like, but we've gone ahead with that. We've said still we will focus on indigenous development. We may not have had the best equipment at times. We've made do with whatever the best Indian companies can offer or the DRDO can offer, but we've gone along with that. But it is very important to understand that combat capability cannot be compromised. So it is we have to create a mechanism, an ecosystem which is able to deliver to the Indian Navy, in fact, to the Indian Armed Forces, what the Indian Armed Forces need. There is a misconception that the Indian Armed Forces want imported equipment. Indian Armed Forces do not want Indian imported. They want good equipment. You give it to them, make it in India and give it to them, they're more than happy with it. But if you can't give it to them, they can't go into war with one arm tied behind their backs. That is something we need to understand. Now, coming to shipbuilding. We have, as I said, 39 or 40 ships under construction at the moment. We're very proud of that, and it is quite commendable. But we do not have the shipbuilding capacity in India to build any more than that. So tomorrow, even if the government were to give us all the money in the world to make all the number of ships that we want, we just don't have the shipbuilding capacity to do that. We have only 5 shipyards which are building warships. 3 private shipyards came up. Good shipyards, modern shipyards came up. 4, in fact. 3 of them have shut down because the ecosystem did not support them. The government of India failed to create the enabling environment to make them worthwhile. Instead, they made it so competitive that they crashed under their own weight of trying to just compete in cutting down, and slashing prices so that they become L1 and they'd get the contract. They found they were uneconomical and unviable and had to shut down. So effectively, instead of creating the capability, we destroyed the capability we could have created. And this happened because we've got this funny thing called the defense PSUs. And I'm being very blunt about this. The defense PSUs come under the Ministry of Defense. So it's a very incestuous relationship. The Ministry of Defense decides to buy something. The Ministry of Defense places the order to the Ministry of Defense. Contract is signed with the Ministry of Defense. The equipment is built by the Ministry of Defense and then sold back to the Ministry of Defense. Effectively, that's what is happening. It's because DPSUs belong to the MOD. Now that is an unviable way of going about business. So we have to see how can we get over this. For example, we have something called a strategic partnership model, under which we have the Project 75I happening. This model first came out in 2016 in the Defense Procurement Procedure. It was reiterated in the Defense Procurement Procedure of 2020, what's called a Defense Acquisition Procedure. Between 16 and 20, there were many issues which were raised by various stakeholders, saying that there are areas which need to be addressed in this. There are a lot of ambiguities which need to be addressed if you want companies to come in with the kind of technology you want. Please address these. And we were told that all your inputs have been taken, are being heeded, and it's going to be, all the stakeholders are going to be consulted. But what came out in 2020 was word by word, comma by comma, what was in 2016. And we are seeing where that program is heading. We still haven't seen a contract being signed under the strategic partnership model. So the ecosystem has to take all stakeholders on board and then devise the best way forward, and not be mutually suspicious of each other and everybody's thinking that the other guy is taking him for a ride. That syndrome has to be eliminated. Absolutely. Once that happens, things will move ahead much more rapidly.
Absolutely.
So that's where we stand as a Navy. But yes, we have a shipbuilding program. We have a 15-year maritime capability perspective plan, which decides what the Navy needs, how much money will we have, what the Navy needs. And according to that, we plan our force levels. All of them may not happen because of delays and time overruns and cost overruns, but yes, by and large, it conforms to a well worked out plan for capability enhancement.
Absolutely, sir. I think I agree with you. The ecosystem and the thought process itself has, brought us down. It's the same case that we see with the Indian Air Force as well. I mean, after a gap of 36 years, we received the first batch of Rafales, and that to 36 numbers. So it's something which needs to be looked at. You cannot be so stuck, with regards to defense procurement. If you're not making with us, we need to get it from abroad. The threats are from two directions, and if you count the naval aspect of it, the frontage is really, really, really vast. We need to protect ourselves. There's no question about it. I'm going to just come back to the Chinese Navy, sir. We had recently an accident that took place with the US submarine, the Connecticut, somewhere close to the South China Sea, and there have been rumors flying around the place. The US has not come out and said what exactly happened. They just said they hit something at the bottom. The Chinese put out a rumor that, I don't know, was it the purpose for propaganda, hybrid warfare, or something like that. But a lot of people suspect the fact that either an unmanned drone submarine or something like that hit the US submarine at that particular juncture, and which is what caused the accident and injuries to about 15 odd people. So I'd like to ask you, what's your analysis as somebody who's served under the water, and how dangerous do you think this sort of a trend is with regards the safety and security of this region, especially knowing the fact that there is obviously a lot of covert activity happening over and under the ocean, under the surface?
Well, let me say this. USS Connecticut was supposed to have hit a sea mount, which is an uncharted, land feature probably under the sea. Now, for something like this to happen in waters as congested as South China Sea are, and the amount of submarines that operate in those waters, is a fairly remote possibility if that is what has happened. It's unlikely that there'll be a mount. Firstly, they haven't told, we still don't know in the public domain what depth was the submarine operating at. Yes, if it was very close to the bottom of the sea, I can understand that, there could be a mount. But if it was, let's say, just below the surface, it's unlikely there'd be a mount coming up that high. So they haven't disclosed what depth the submarine was operating at, which is very important to understand what could have caused the damage. Whether it was another submarine it's collided with, which was also spoken about at one stage, is unlikely because the kind of damage that Connecticut had, the other submarine would have suffered similar damage, if not more, and would also have surfaced and headed back to some port somewhere. But no damaged submarine was reported entering any port thereafter or seen on the surface. So a submarine to submarine unintended collision, I think, is unlikely. It has happened before. A French nuclear submarine and a British nuclear submarine had touched each other in the English Channel in 2008 or 9. So it has happened before because submarines are passive underwater. It is a possibility you may not pick up another object. Is it hybrid warfare? Is it an unmanned drone? I wouldn't be surprised if it is. Intended or unintended? Also, I wouldn't be surprised if it is. It may be just a message. I would like to think that it's not intended because I don't think things have reached a flashpoint where this kind of thing would be done underwater to a submarine. The submarine could very well have sunk. You can't control the amount of damage it's going to have. You can probably ensure that it collides with something, but you can't control the damage. So what if the submarine had sunk? What if a Seawolf class submarine of the US Navy had sunk due to a deliberate act by another navy or by another country? So it's very difficult to say at this stage. I would say this much, that if it was a sea mount which is uncharted, then the submarine didn't know that it was going to hit it, and submarine had no way of knowing it was going to hit it. But they've still removed the commanding officer, the executive officer, and the chief of the boat from command, which could again be for two reasons: either navigational negligence or not handling the emergency properly once it happened on board. So we don't know again what was the reason for it. It just says loss of confidence. It doesn't say what was the exact reason they were removed from command, the commanding officer and the number two. So these are two factors. So I wouldn't put it past it having hit some object, because the damage has been considerable. She's had to go back to San Diego on surface to get it rectified. People were injured. And Seawolves are very good submarines. They were, in fact, the Seawolves class was supposed to be an extremely modern submarine, but it turned out to be so expensive that the Americans had to scale down the program. And they finally went to the Virginia class, which was cheaper and easier to build. So Seawolf is a very, very advanced submarine. But really speaking, unless more information comes out in the public domain, it will be difficult to specifically suggest what could have caused the collision on Connecticut. However, the possibility of hybrid warfare being used is not being ruled out. About 2 years ago, 2 US destroyers, John McCain and one more, had collided with merchant ships within a fortnight of each other somewhere in the Malacca Straits or off Singapore Straits or somewhere in the south in the Western Pacific. They had these collisions, and in the line of inquiry that was thereafter, when the board of inquiry was ordered, one of the lines of inquiry was, had somebody tampered with the GPS system, led them off track and led to the collision? Had someone messed around with the navigation system? While subsequently it was proven that it was navigational error which caused the thing to happen, the fact that it was even considered as a possibility meant that it is possible that it can be done. So that is something we have to be careful about in the future, because it's very easy now to tamper with the system, a GPS system or something like that. And that's why you see the Chinese have gone with their own navigational system, the Beidou. They're not following a GPS. The Russians have GLONASS. So everybody is developing their own systems, mainly perhaps because of this. As far as, coming to the unmanned aspect is concerned, one of the serious debates with more and more unmanned technologies coming in and relying on artificial intelligence and, things like that, machine learning, etc., a very serious global debate is happening right now on two things. One, the ethics of unmanned warfare and the ethics of artificial intelligence. In India, we haven't debated it much, but there are very serious debates happening. How do you control it? What are the regulatory mechanisms to tell? How will artificial intelligence decide whether this is ethical or not ethical before it does something? And how do you ensure countries conform to the ethical sort of framework under which this might operate? That is one. The second issue that is causing concern, particularly in the Western Pacific, is something called water space management. As it is, there's a proliferation of submarines in the Western Pacific. Almost 14 countries in the Western Pacific are operating submarines today. Waters are narrow, whether it's the Malacca Straits or it's the South China Sea. They're not open oceans. They're restricted waters to a certain extent. So how do you ensure that? And with UUVs becoming, more and more ubiquitous, and you'll have a lot of them in the waters very soon. So a combination of unmanned underwater vehicles, submarines, nuclear submarines, all kinds of things. How do you control the water space? How do you prevent unintended consequences, unintended incidents happening at sea between two platforms underwater? So this is something that nobody is able to get his head around, because no country, however close it may be to another country, is going to share its submarine information as to where it's deploying its submarines in another country. That's for sure. So how are they going to tackle this water space management? I really don't know. But it is a subject which needs to be debated and discussed.
True, sir. I actually was reading a paper on this, and somebody had recommended it should be a similar format as what is followed in the air. But we all know what happens there as well. I mean, there have been multiple incidents of, intrusions, air intrusions, and so on and so forth, and even collisions for that matter. In spite of having such a robust air traffic control system all across the world, there have been aircraft that have just gone missing. So it's something which is going to be very, very difficult to bring about in terms of because the surface area is obviously much larger to control, and how do you monitor anything? It's interesting. So looking at the threats to India, you mentioned the Hambantota port, you mentioned the Gwadar port. We also know that the Chinese are trying to take a deep water port in the Kaikfu area in Myanmar. They were in talks with the Bangladeshis, which kind of is in a doldrum right now. They've got the Coco Islands, which is very, very close to our territory in the Andamans as well. They've got a port in Djibouti. They were trying to build up a sort of a port in the UAE, which has got rubbished at the moment. So we see them kind of, if I may put it, it's called the string of pearls and stuff like that. We see them surrounding us. How do you see this sort of a situation, especially with Pakistan and the recent, gift, if I may put it that way, of a vessel to the Pakistanis? I don't think the capability would be to offend, but to harass the Indian Navy within the Arabian Sea. How do you see this entire situation?
Well, I'll give you my personal take on this. Firstly, this, strategic encirclement of India, what has been often referred to as the string of pearls strategy, is very much there. And it's now got subsumed by the overall Belt and Road Initiative, which includes this as well. So if you really look at the Chinese, if you come from the mainland, Thailand is operating a Chinese submarine.
True.
Myanmar has got a close military linkages with China, which we are trying to sort of also deepen our engagement with Myanmar. We gave them a submarine last. Now, one country giving and we gave it from one of our old kilos when we ourselves are short of submarines, which meant a lot. Therefore, that just sort of indicated the depth of engagement we would like to do with Myanmar, because a submarine is a very valuable piece of equipment to be given to somebody, as a sign of friendship. It could have been, we could have given a radar or a sonar or something, or we gave a whole submarine, which Myanmar is operating today. Bangladesh was given 2 submarines by China, and China is supposed to be building a submarine base off Chittagong. Well, ostensibly for the Bangladesh Navy. But look, with 2 submarines in a navy, you're not going to create a whole maintenance and sustainment infrastructure for submarines. So obviously they're going to be relying on the Chinese for the refits, for the maintenance, for their spares, and for everything else. So China has got a fair amount of military and diplomatic leverage now in that country. So that is as far as the Bay of Bengal is concerned. We are not comfortable in the Bay of Bengal anymore, as we would have liked to. So a Chinese submarine presence in the Bay of Bengal is definitely an inevitability, as and when they have enough submarines to deploy in these waters. And if they have a facility in Bangladesh to service those submarines, all the better for them. Coming further down, Hambantota. Well, Hambantota, for all practical purposes, is a commercial port. But what prevents it from use as a staging facility for for PLA Navy ships subsequently? And then the Colombo Port City project. So they've got a pretty strong hold in the southern Indian Ocean, particularly over Dondra Head. Dondra Head is the main traffic scheme for most of the traffic going from Western Indian Ocean to the Malacca Straits and beyond. Now, if they're sitting at the southernmost tip of Sri Lanka, well, Dondra Head is just south of that traffic separation scheme. So they have a fair amount of control they would be able to exercise on the traffic going to and from Sri Lanka or across Sri Lanka. Then if we come to Pakistan's Navy has never been a very powerful Navy, but they have always focused on a good submarine capability, because they have believed, like a weaker Navy vis-a-vis a powerful Navy, sea denial is the strategy of choice. And submarines are the ideal platform for sea denial. So they've always focused, they may have had second-hand surface ships, but they've always had good state-of-the-art submarines, right up to the Augusta 90B, which are AIP fitted. So, but they've always had a number of 3 to 5. They've never gone beyond that, which seemed adequate for their requirement for a country of that size and with their coastline. But China is now giving them 4 destroyers, the Type 054, of which the first one has already been commissioned to Green. 3 more will follow. And 8 submarines, 8 Type 039 AIP fitted conventional submarines, of which 4 are being built in China and 4 are going to be built in Pakistan. In fact, just about a fortnight ago, they cut steel for the first one to be built in Pakistan, the 5th submarine of the class, Hangor, which is the name of the submarine which sank the Kukri in 1971. So with that sort of capability, what is Pakistan going to do with it? What does Pakistan need to defend that it needs 11 submarines and so many warships? Is it looking to play a larger role in the Indian Ocean? Or is it going to ultimately end up as a proxy for China's larger role in the Indian Ocean? Particularly when China is going to control Gwadar. To me, it seems that it is going to be more of a proxy force for Chinese domination of the Indian Ocean than a standalone naval power trying to take on the Indian Navy. Because 8 more submarines are not going to make it help take on the Indian Navy. It certainly is going to have to work in tandem. So it's going to be doing, I think it's going to be doing China's bidding in 5 or 10 years from now, rather than its own standalone sort of a naval capability. Then if you go further south, you take Iran, Chinese presence, Djibouti, they have a huge base. They're extending the jetty over there now to accommodate an aircraft carrier, which means that soon you'll find Chinese aircraft carriers in the Indian Ocean. East Africa, they've got a fair amount of presence along the East African countries. They are trying very hard to establish a presence in all the strategically located islands, Seychelles, Madagascar, the Mozambique Channel they want to control. Again, in West Asia, they're trying. They almost had, they'd almost taken over Maldives. Fortunately, we were able to sort of get it back with a huge amount of economic support being given to that country. So China is establishing a very wide network of strategically located ports and countries so as to be able to dominate the Indian Ocean, which, as I mentioned earlier. And India, like I said, probably cannot match China economically. We just don't have that kind of economic clout. So we have to do it in more tactful and in a more deft manner, which I think India is doing. Things like Sagar, the Sagar doctrine. security and growth for all in the region, which Prime Minister Modi spoke about in 2015 when he went to Mauritius, is a very, very useful initiative. It has really helped. I mean, following the Sagar Doctrine, where India has taken the lead, has really helped India in creating an inclusive, and I'm specifying these two words, inclusive and cooperative capacity building infrastructure with India in the leadership role. Unlike kind of throwing our weight on them, like countries like China is doing the Belt and Road Initiative. So I think there's lots of good activity happening there. We probably need to step it up a grade. There have been a lot of attempts. For example, BIMSTEC has been revived. There's lots happening in for connectivity between Southeast Asia and South Asia. So there are various initiatives happening. The question is, are they happening fast enough? I think a fair amount has been achieved. We are on a good diplomatic wicket. The foreign policy outreach in the East and now the West has always is very welcome. We are on a very good wicket with the UAE. We are on a good wicket with Saudi Arabia. We have a very good strategic relationship with Israel. We are one of the very few countries which are friends with Israel and Iran, which I think is a great success of Indian foreign policy over the years. So I think we are okay. We obviously need to find ways and means of building our own capacity in our own way and ensuring that we are able to retain our primacy in the Indian Ocean, ultimately.
I think, absolutely. I don't think I will be able to find anything to disagree with that particular thing. And one of the biggest things that we've seen is that the competition between India and China in this particular thing is heating up. You mentioned Maldives, and that's something that we've worked on. As a matter of fact, Bangladesh also, we've seen some amount of credit line being given to push the Chinese influence away from Bangladesh. And there is also our foreign secretary who's visiting Myanmar. So one sees some sort of an activity, probably a reactive activity, fair enough. But agree with you, it needs to get a little more proactive and more aggressive to kind of counter and secure our particular region. One just thought that came to my mind when you mentioned about Pakistan, so it can also mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the division of work between the Chinese and the Pakistanis, where the Bay of Bengal, which is obviously the larger region, China, and towards that side, the Pakistanis would be able to help the Chinese trade and vessels to come in without any hindrance in times of war or something like that. But it's really interesting when you say that the Pakistanis being armed with 11 submarines and very high class frigates and destroyers, which probably they don't need with the small coastline they do have. I'd like to continue this particular conversation with my last question. The second carrier for the Indian Navy is coming out, and one of the biggest things that is being discussed right now is obviously the air power that carrier will be able to project. We don't see any particular movement in terms of buying aircraft. There is obviously the naval version of the Tejas, which is under trials. But the aircraft carrier is on sea trials, and it's supposed to be online by 2022 end or early 2023. Having said that, the air power integration, procurement, integration, and of course deployment takes. Who am I to actually make a judge? But it takes a long time. How do you see that entire situation? Are we off our timelines a little bit with regards to the second carrier? And do you think there is a little more focus that we need to provide to the debate, as I asked you earlier, with regards more submarines or a third carrier?
Yeah, okay. The two parts to this question. Firstly, our own carrier capability. Yes, the second carrier, Vikrant, is most welcome whenever it gets commissioned. Firstly, it's a great testament to our own technological and industrial skills. It's an indigenously built carrier. It's a major capability that India has developed over the years. It has taken long to build, but that is understandable. It's the first time we're doing it. And I'm sure future carriers, if and when they happen, will be able to, speed up the building process. As far as aviation component goes, yes, we have. That's one of, when I mentioned it, we have a full spectrum capability with some capability gaps. Naval aviation is one, both in terms of the fighter capability, the strike capability, as well as our helicopter retrieving capability. We need many more helicopters than we have. Various programs have been, we've been hearing about various programs over the years, but frankly speaking, not very much has happened on ground. Now we're getting 24 of the Sikorsky MH-60R helicopters, which are replacing the old Sea King. But the old Sea Kings were really long in the tooth. I mean, we were actually short of a good anti-surface, anti-submarine helicopter capability. And these 24 will just be a sort of interim stopgap arrangement to meet our immediate requirements. This is not the solution. The solution is actually 112, which was the original program to build 112 NMRH, they're called Naval Multi-Role Helicopters, indigenously. But what's happening on that program, I really don't know, because one doesn't hear very much about it. The fighter program, as you know, the Tejas Mark II is moving, but it's moving at its own pace. Now they're talking about developing something called a carrier-based, deck-based fighter, twin-engine deck-based fighter, TEDBF, which is the next sort of step HAL and DRDO are taking about developing carrier aviation. So I don't think the Tejas per se will ever come to the Indian Navy. It will probably be the derivative of the Tejas, the naval derivative of Tejas, which will be probably be this TEBDF, twin engine deck, TEDBF, twin engine deck based fighter. So this is something that will happen over a period of time. In the meantime, you're aware there is an RFI for, I don't know how many, I think quite a few fighter jets. The F-18 is being spoken about, Gripen is being spoken about. But these are all at a chit-chat stage at the moment. There's no concrete program in place right now. So we will have to continue for some time with the existing MiG-29s on both the carriers, which will restrict, I'm sure, the capability of both carriers to a certain extent, particularly when both are operational. But I suppose this will be addressed as and when the time comes. So I don't want to say too much more about it because I really don't know where exactly the program is at the moment on getting new aircraft. As far as the debate on submarines or carriers goes, firstly, I don't think there's a debate at all. It's like comparing apples and oranges. A submarine is a submarine and an aircraft carrier is an aircraft carrier. I'm afraid the people who generated this debate lacked adequate knowledge of the maritime domain to be able to even suggest such a debate in the first place. Yes, nuclear SSNs or nuclear attack submarines are critical to a blue water capability. We need SSNs, but that does not mean that we do not need aircraft carriers. And the third aircraft carrier, which we keep hearing about, and people again keep saying the Navy wants a third aircraft carrier, the Navy does, the Navy does not want a third aircraft carrier. The Navy needs a third aircraft carrier. If the Navy has to do the role the government wants it to do or play, if it wants to project its Navy as the principal component of its global power, which it will have to, then it has to equip the Navy to be able to be credible in projecting that power. Therefore, and the only reason the Navy says we need to have 3 carriers is because we need to have 2 carrier battle groups operational at all times. Otherwise, the credibility of your carrier force is gone. If half the time is spent with one of your carriers in a dry dock or being repaired or being maintained, then effectively you are not a credible carrier Navy. So the third carrier is important. As I understand, they're going to call it Vishal, from what I understand. It's going to be a 65,000 ton carrier, which is what we need. China is going to be deploying 80,000 ton carriers very soon. The third or fourth carrier is going to be 80,000 tons. We need that kind of 65,000 ton carrier. Means you can put a heavier aircraft on board. It will give you longer strike ranges with better armament. So you can, the carrier is an extremely versatile platform. It can travel 500 kilometers. It's a self-contained, well-protected air base, bringing a lot of capability other than just aviation, which can travel 500 kilometers in a day. So you can position this anywhere you want at any time. You can shape the maritime battle space with a carrier battle group. You can shape the outcome of the land battle with a carrier battle group from seaward. You can open a new front for the enemy with a maritime presence, which can carry out attacks on land. So it's a very versatile platform. And I think it's time we understood that. And look, let's face it. It's going to be expensive. Obviously, building a carrier is not cheap. But then it's not being built in a year. It's got to be spaced out over 15 or 20 years. So I'm sure the country can spare that kind of money, or should be looking to see how it can spare that kind of money for this capability. And navies do not get built in a day. So if you're looking to be the dominant power in the Indian Ocean in 2035, at a time when China is going to be breathing down your neck in the Indian Ocean, you've got to start building that navy now. You cannot build this navy 10 years from now. So whether it's your submarine capability, whether it's your aircraft carrier capability, whether it's your aviation capability or maritime patrol or whatever, you've got to start looking 15 to 20 years hence from now and start investing, making that investment now. Navies need that kind of investment to be able to be ready when the time comes.
I absolutely agree with you, sir. And as a matter of fact, one used to see some strategic programs where there's a debate about, we should have more submarines, we should have another carrier. Carriers are too expensive in
We
this.
should have more submarines and we should have more carriers.
I believe so.
We should have more submarines.
I mean, I look at it like that. So as a layman, I look at it like that. The more we're able to build, one big thing that we're able to do is generate that much more employment for our people. There are more
Yes.
skill set that you will develop within the country. And, God willing, someday some third nation might just walk up to you, hey, listen, I like this. Why don't you build up one for me? There you go. And that's how the whole story starts. It's something we cannot be shy of. I think we are very shy of projecting our military force, just so that
Yes.
we should not be projected as bad boys with big guns and stuff like that. But I think it's high time we shun that whole image of peaceniks. And I personally have a big, huge disagreement with this entire thing, because your military industrial complex also gives you a huge amount of employment, huge amount of technological development, huge amount of say. And of course, if nothing else, it protects your own country. Well, what is wrong in that? I don't see anything. So I
Yeah.
absolutely agree with you. And I'm talking just as a layman, as someone who's interested in strategic affairs and the defense of this great nation of ours. I look at it in a very, very layman perspective, that it will generate revenue, it will generate employment, it will generate a know-how that we need to have. And that's just about it. If we do need it, we can switch over and we can start. And that's what the Chinese are doing. I mean, it's something that is very, very interesting to note. So thank you so much. I think this has been an eye-opener for me. I've noted down so many points that I need to actually research on before I even trouble you for the next conversation, because you took us through a very, very broad spectrum of what the maritime uh, dispute or the maritime confrontation is all about with the Chinese, how the world powers are trying to position themselves within this region, and everybody is trying to have a stake in the cake. Um, it is an ocean that is named after us. I think we should have the biggest stake, and we should be able to protect ourselves. If not aggressively go after anybody else, we have to protect our interests. We have to protect, whatever we have in our this thing. And secondly, with the Chinese building up this so-called string of pearls, it is important that we get off from our slumber and start up our uh, you know, uh, the whatever plan that we've got to implement and protect ourselves somewhere down the line, as 2035, 2040, as the timelines that you've mentioned. It's been a great experience for me to talk to you. So I think this is one of my first naval-based interviews purely. Thank you so much for
Well,
taking the time out, and I will obviously, bother you once again for another subject on another day, sir. Till then, Jai Hind.
thank you very much, Adi. It was a pleasure. Thank you.